CD10.
There was a small, miserable silence. "I honestly don't know," he replied. "I've asked myself the same thing 100 times. I swear, I was so shocked when I discovered Lydia's name in the list of business account payees and found out who she was." She stared at him. He was paying her. Judging by his expression, he knew he'd put his foot in it. "Oh, yes," he said awkwardly. There was a monthly maintenance payment going out to her. For her daughter. That's how I found out in the first place, because I was doing the VAT return. He stabbed another chip. It wasn't because Patrick was still seeing her or anything, though. Apparently, he finished whatever relationship they had as soon as she got pregnant and was paying her off, basically. Paying her to keep quiet and stay out of his life. Ugh. The more Zoe found out about her husband's secrets, the worse the situation became. And this must be why Dan went so weird on her the other week when she mentioned Patrick's paperwork, she realised. Christ, so many layers of deceit. "You know," she said dully, "all this time I've been really regretting not saying anything about Patrick at the funeral. Not giving a proper eulogy on the day. I've been writing one in my head ever since to say when we scatter the ashes. The most loyal, loving, wonderful husband and father, that sort of thing." She gave a horrible bark of a laugh that felt more like a sob. "But how can I say it now? How can I say those words?" Dan put his cutlery down and took her hand over the table. "Look, Patrick did some stupid things, all right? Really stupid things that neither of us understands. But that doesn't mean he didn't love you and the kids any less, and that you didn't love him any less. The way you felt about him was real, and that's still valid. What you two had was good. He did love you. He just had this weakness, I guess, that meant he couldn't be satisfied." He shrugged. "I don't get it either, but that doesn't mean all the good stuff between you didn't happen." She knew he was doing his best to comfort her, but she was too numb for his words to change anything right now. Perhaps it was time to talk about something different, find a lighter, easier conversation to have instead. But then again, she figured, maybe this was the perfect moment to get it all out there on the table, to hear every detail, however grim that might be. No more secrets. The worst had already happened, right? "The night Patrick died," she began slowly, "we had an argument, just a silly one about whether or not the kid should go to university. If he'd come back the next day, we'd have made up, it would have been forgotten. But it's been killing me ever since, thinking that he might have died, angry with me. Was he—" She broke off, shooting an agonised look at Dan. "Was he slagging me off to you in the pub that night? I've always wondered if that's why you wouldn't tell me what happened." Dan shook his head. "No, he didn't slag you off." He wrinkled his forehead, thinking hard. What did he say about you? He mentioned something about you doing well at work, I think, that you'd found a school you really liked." She nodded, remembering how the row had started. "He definitely didn't slag you off, though. He seemed proud of you, if anything." "Hey." He looked alarmed by the way her face had fallen. "That's a good thing, isn't it?" She hadn't realised until now quite how much tension she'd been holding about their argument. "Yes," she agreed shakily. "That's a good thing. I was so worried that—" Emotion overwhelmed her. "You know when you have a row and it blows up and you say stuff you don't really mean? I never got the chance to tell him I was sorry. Neither did he, and... Oh, Zoe, you should have said something sooner. Dan looked mortified. If he died angry with anyone, it was with me, not you. I promise. He argued with Mary too, this other woman he was seeing. She replied miserably, her stomach twisting as she imagined Patrick pinballing from one person to the next, row after row. Had it all been too much for him, in the end? Despite everything, she hated the thought of him feeling cornered and desperate on that last night. If only he'd made it home, they could have sorted everything out between them, couldn't they? She blew her nose, trying to gather herself. Do you want to tell me about it? She asked Dan in a low voice, seeing as this has turned into a warts and all confession. It was his turn to look anguished then, gazing down at what was left of his fish and chips, poking a fork at the last few peas. I swore I was never going to get into this with you, he mumbled, but okay. He told me that he and Rebecca, well, that they went behind my back, and yours too. That's why I lost it. Zoe gaped. Yet another can of worms she wished she hadn't opened. Patrick and Dan's wife. He told you... She repeated, unable to say the words aloud because they were so awful. Had Patrick possessed any kind of conscience or shame? Every time she thought she had hit rock bottom, it turned out there was another level to fall. How many other women were there in the shadows? It wasn't true, though, Dan added hurriedly. Okay, I have since found out, via Rebecca, who tore a strip off me for asking, that they didn't sleep together or anything else. Patrick made up the entire thing. He raised his palms in a weary gesture. I have no idea why. Your guess is as good as mine. Maybe it was because I was about to go off travelling and have some fun for once, and he shrugged. I don't know. Felt the need to try and piss on my fireworks, like brothers do now and then. Zoe was reeling. Oh, Dan. And that's why you didn't let him stay at your place. That's why I didn't let him stay at my place. Her head swam as she felt a flash of the tumult that he too must have undergone. And Dan had kept the whole thing to himself in order to protect her, when he must have been through hell, she realised. What a nightmare, she said, remembering how haunted he'd looked at the funeral, how the colour had all but leached out of him, how furious she had been, blaming him for what had happened, when all along... Yep, he said. So, now you know. They looked at each other, wordless. Fuck it, she said. I need a drink. I'm going to ask Claire to pick up the kids from school. Ethan can get the bus to his club for once. Shall we get shit-faced? Just the two of us? That's the best idea I've heard all day, he replied. Chapter 32. Dan had warned Lydia that she could expect a second, very different visit from Zoe at some point following their so-called lunch date of truth. I think she feels pretty bad about the way she behaved, he'd said. All the same, when the shop bell jangled and Lydia saw the other woman coming in, she felt completely sick with nerves at whatever was about to happen. Not to mention bracing herself for the possibility of having to duck reflexively once again. Jonathan, too, recognised Zoe and immediately moved to stand beside Lydia, arms folded. For someone whose natural instinct was for jollity, he could do stern pretty well, it transpired. I sincerely hope this is not going to be a repeat of your last appearance, he said, in an impressively head-teacherish voice. because I'm not about to stand here and let you attack my staff. Do you understand? Zoe hung her head, clutching her own hands as if needing to cling to something. She was wearing a white linen shirt and jeans with the exact same Zara leopard print pumps that Bridget always wore. In a different life, they might have been friends, Lydia thought. I've come to apologise, Zoe said, looking directly at Lydia. I'm really sorry. She bit her lip. I'm not trying to make excuses, but I've been under a lot of stress recently. Clearly, I shouldn't have acted the way I did, though. So, I'm sorry. She seemed genuine, at least. She also seemed a lot smaller and more tired than the last time she'd turned up here. Quietly spoken. Lydia didn't want to stare, but it looked as if she'd only put mascara on her left eyelashes and had forgotten about the right ones. Was it possible to bear a grudge against someone who couldn't even get it together to do their makeup properly? Okay, she said eventually. I'll pay for the vase, obviously. Zoe rummaged in her bag for her purse. How much do I owe you? Lydia and Jonathan exchanged a glance. John, could we have a minute, do you think? Lydia asked. He eyeballed Zoe with a hard stare, clearly not fully trusting her. She put her hands up, still holding her purse. I'm not here to cause trouble, she said. I promise. You'd better not, Jonathan said severely, before turning back to Lydia. Have a break if you want. Go and get a coffee or something. Thanks, John, Lydia replied. If you're up for that, she asked Zoe. Her heart was thumping, wondering how this was going to go. Her instinct was that all the fight had gone from Zoe, but you never could tell. Okay, said Zoe. She glanced back at Jonathan, looking uncertain. Should I pay for the vase first, or... You can buy Lydia a bloody good coffee instead, he replied. And be nice to her, for heaven's sake. She's done nothing wrong. He jerked his head towards the door. Call me if you need anything, he said to Lydia, as she grabbed her jacket and they left. There was a cafe next door to the shop, but the staff in there all knew Lydia, and she couldn't bear the thought of any of them eavesdropping on what was potentially a dynamite-packed conversation. So she suggested the Italian place at the bottom of the road that did the best latte in the postcode. She was going to need rocket fuel to get through this little chat, she guessed. They ordered drinks and sat down, neither of them quite able to meet the other's eye. So how shall we do this? Zoe asked. She looked incredibly nervous, Lydia thought, drained of colour, apart from some very red lipstick that she had presumably put on for courage. For her part, Lydia was only glad she had bothered to do her makeup properly herself that morning, both lashes coated in mascara, for starters, and that she was wearing her favourite olive green jumpsuit, which had been an absolute bugger to make, but was the most flattering item in her wardrobe. Lydia said, thinking fast. The stakes felt dizzyingly high right now. She had to find the words to navigate her way through. I guess I want you to know that I had no idea Patrick was married when he and I, on my life, I had no clue. Zoe nodded. Dan said as much. But thank you. There were such bags under her eyes, Lydia noticed. Bags that even a ton of foundation and concealer couldn't disguise. This woman must be completely shattered, she thought, feeling a stab of sympathy for her, despite the circumstances. Because of the circumstances as well, if she was honest. She found herself wanting to be generous in defeat, to give this broken woman some kind of comfort, if possible. Getting pregnant was an accident, she went on. But Patrick was quick to choose you over me. That was made very clear to me. His loyalties definitely lay with you. Zoe fiddled with the salt cellar, a scornful breath puffing from her lips. "I'm not sure loyalty is really a word I could use about my husband now," she replied. A moment passed. "I'm sorry he was a shit to you," she added in a low voice. There was a lump in Lydia's throat. "I'm sorry he was a shit to you, too," she said. They looked at each other, and for the first time the barriers of mistrust seemed to lower a fraction, replaced by what felt like a slender thread of mutual understanding. They had both been wronged by the same man, after all. They had both adored him too. Despite everything, there was some common ground to be had. A moment passed and then Zoe cleared her throat. "Tell me about your daughter," she said. Lydia hesitated. "Are you sure? It won't be too weird for you." Zoe's body language was taut, as if she was steeling herself to receive a blow, but she nodded all the same. She had guts, it was undeniable. "We're going to have to do this, aren't we?" she said. "We can't pretend that this isn't how things are." Her mouth buckled a little. "I mean, part of me would love to pretend, obviously. I was desperate for none of this to be real, but..." She broke off, pressing her lips together. "We're grown-ups," Lydia finished for her, and her own words took her by surprise. Hadn't she been fretting the other week that she wasn't a proper grown-up? Maybe she was making a better fist of it than she thought. Thinking things through, as her mum had always advised. "All the same," she added, seeing tears glimmering in Zoe's eyes, "we don't have to do this here and now if you'd rather take some time." Zoe shook her head. "Let's rip the plaster right off," she said. "I can handle it." "Well, in that case..." Lydia opened her phone and showed Zoe the photo on the home screen of Jemima upside down mid-cartwheel, hair flying everywhere, face screwed up in concentration. "This is Jemima. She's 7 years old, loves sport and dogs, is friendly and brave, constantly trying to find me someone to marry, even if that's my best female friend." And so it begins, she thought, feeling nervous and a little trepidatious as she flicked through her gallery to find more photographs, and the two of them began to exchange fragments about each other's lives. Zoe produced pictures of her children, and Lydia found herself poring over them. Jemima's brothers and sister, she marvelled, gazing at every detail of their faces. This would not be an easy road for her and Zoe to walk down, that was for sure. But at least they were both trying to make it work. Could she ask for any more at this point? It was only as Lydia finished her coffee that she realised they'd been sitting there for 40 minutes, and she should probably get back to work. There was a limit to Jonathan's generosity, particularly so close to lunchtime. "I should head off," she said, "but thank you for this chat. I really mean it. I know the situation isn't great, but thanks for not hating me, I guess." She grimaced at her own naive positivity. For all she knew, Zoe did hate her, but had a better poker face than Lydia gave her credit for. Zoe's expression was certainly hard to read now. "You've got Dan to thank for that," she said. There was a pause. I'm not sure where we go from here," she went on. "What do you want out of this? Ideally." Lydia gulped. She had been so busy feeling sorry for Zoe that she hadn't actually considered her own self in the matter. I don't mean financially," Zoe said quickly, and then it was her turn to pull a face. "Although I suppose we'll have to talk about that at some point too." She bit her lip. "God, this is so strange, isn't it? I don't know the right thing to do, how to feel." "No," Lydia agreed. "Me neither." She thought for a moment. "I can see that your children might be upset to hear about Jemima and me. Whereas for Jemima, the stakes aren't so high. She would be over the moon to have a half-sister and half-brothers, in fact. So let's take any next steps at your pace, whenever you're ready. Thanks. Zoe's eyes looked wet again. I don't know how I'm going to tell them, she confessed. Mind you, saying that, Bea would love a sister too. She's always going on about how annoying brothers are. They exchanged small, anxious smiles. It was a mess, but neither of them was afraid. Perhaps that was all that could be hoped for right now. By the way, could you give me Dan's address? Lydia asked, changing the subject. I've got something for him. A surprise. Zoe hesitated a fraction. Maybe she didn't completely trust her after all. But then reeled off a street name and number. She gave Lydia an appraising look. What's the deal with you and him anyway? She asked. He was very nice about you over lunch yesterday. But then again, we were completely pissed by that point. Lydia tried to keep her face neutral. He's got the brains, I've got the looks, Patrick had said about Dan all those years ago, and she'd laughed coquettishly at the time. I know which I prefer, she'd replied, pressing herself against him. Funny how a bit of time and distance could change your mind about things. We're just friends, she said, getting to her feet. Her complicated feelings for Dan meant it was impossible to answer honestly in one single snappy sentence. She really liked him, and for a few heady moments at Jonathan's party, she had wanted very much to kiss him. But she recognised that they were both holding the other at bay, because the repercussions were potentially so difficult, so messy. Not that Zoe needed to know any of this right now, obviously. Lydia didn't want the other woman getting the wrong idea about her either. First you have a fling with my husband, now you're going after my brother-in-law. It really wasn't like that. It wasn't like that at all. Walking back to the shop a few minutes later, Lydia felt light with possibilities, though, as if good things might be on the horizon. Okay, so she had told a tiny white lie to Zoe about having got something for Dan, but she knew exactly what that thing was. It was simply a matter of organisation. She pulled out her phone again, feeling fizzy with the prospect of a plan. Dad, can you do me a favour? She asked. No, everything's fine. I just need to borrow something, and I'm hoping one of your mates can help me out. Chapter 33. It was only when Dan was parking the car back home on Saturday afternoon following Gabe's birthday party that he realised he was still wearing his Thor wig. He pulled it from his head, snorting a laugh. Perhaps that was why he'd been getting funny looks all the way back from the leisure centre. Still, it had been worth the embarrassment of the costume and all the comments from the mums dropping their kids off to see what a great time Gabe had. A skateboard, whoa! That's so cool, he'd cried, opening the present from Dan. Zoe appeared to be putting her face in her hands, but perhaps that was due to sheer joy at her brother-in-law's generosity. He hoped so, anyway. The party had gone really well, despite being two of the most exhausting and deafening hours of Dan's life. After the terrible Zoe showdown, he had assumed his name had been scrubbed off the guest list. Persona non grata. But he had been reinstated after their greyhound bonding session. Too right you're coming, Zoe had said when he asked. You're not getting out of it that easily. Then her voice softened. Besides, she said, the kids all love their Uncle Dan. They talk about you all the time, you know, about the fun things you've been doing with them. But the big stuff too. Like Ethan telling me the other night that he'd come out to you and that you'd been brilliant. So thank you. Dan's heart had cracked a little with pride. The kids all love their Uncle Dan. It was truly one of the best sentences he'd ever heard in his life. "You're welcome," he'd said. "It's my pleasure." A taxi pulled up alongside him now as he was locking the car. "Fancy seeing you here," called Lydia out of the window. He stared at her in surprise. "Hi," he said. "What are you doing here?" She was paying the driver and didn't reply immediately, but then opened the back door of the cab and got out, turning and reaching back inside to remove. What the hell? "Just thought I'd pop round with my chainsaw," she said, then laughed. "You should see the look on your face. What, does this not happen very often then?" "Women with chainsaws arriving at my house? Funnily enough, no. You're the first," he said. Then the penny dropped. "Oh, right, this is about the tree, is it?" "This is about the tree," she confirmed. There wasn't only a chainsaw, it turned out. She'd arrived with a full kit, including hard hats, safety goggles, and protective headphones for them to wear. She dumped a box of stuff on the pavement, shut the cab door and called thanks to the driver. "Shall we?" she asked, looking down at the chainsaw, then back to Dan. "I've always fancied having a go with one of these." He was still trying to get his head round the fact that she'd rocked up here with so much gear. Where had she even got it from? "Is this what you do in your spare time or something?" he asked, moonlighting as a tree surgeon. A laugh bubbled up from his throat at her delighted expression. She was even wearing what was presumably her tree-removing outfit. Burgundy dungarees over a Breton top with monkey boots, her hair swung up in a ponytail. God, he fancied her, he thought. "You seem very pleased with yourself, you know. Some people might even say smug." "Hell yeah, too right I'm smug," she replied. "And pleased with myself. And pretty glad that you weren't out when I arrived either. That would have spoiled the whole thing." She grinned at him, dimples flashing in her cheeks. "So, are we going in then, or what?" He pulled his door keys from his pocket, then picked up the box of equipment she'd brought. It weighed a ton. "Do I have a choice?" "Come on then, we're going in." He was conscious of his home's plain decor as they went inside, especially compared to Lydia's own flat with all its colours and textures, the memories and stories that were on display in each room. Here there were no memories and stories to see. No insight into his personality revealed at all, he realised. Even his mum had commented on how soulless it was when she'd come round the other day. "I've been meaning to decorate," he mumbled as they went through to the kitchen. "Wow, it's so tidy, Dan. It's like walking into a serial killer's house," she said. Joking, she added quickly. "But whoa! Your recycling is so organised. Amazing." He eyed her. Was she teasing him, he wondered. But she seemed to be sincere, marvelling over his sorting system. Thanks," he ventured. "Nice garden," she went on, walking over to the window. She was so animated, he thought. He really liked that about her. The way she brought life and energy to a conversation, to a place. Even his miserable kitchen felt more interesting with her there. "Lucky you," she was saying. "Ah, and there's the tree, I see. Not for much longer though, right? Shall we set this bad boy on it?" She brandished the chainsaw as if she was about to start carving up the back door with it, and Dan's laugh became slightly more nervous. "I'm kidding again, don't worry," she said, seeing his expression. "How are you, anyway?" And her eyes widened suddenly. "Christ! What are you wearing, by the way?" In the shock of seeing her, he had completely forgotten about his Thor costume, visible in all its fake armour, padded chest glory, now that he'd unzipped his jacket. "Didn't I mention I'm into cosplay?" he said, pulling the wig out of his pocket and plonking it back on his head. Yeah, I always dress like this on a Saturday afternoon. She burst out laughing. Looks good on you, she said. And the blonde hair. Yes, I'm digging it. Should I be scared right now? I'm actually feeling a tiny bit scared. And wishing I'd said a proper goodbye to my daughter when I dropped her at her granddad's. Was I right about the serial killer thing after all? Gabe's birthday party, he said, taking the wig off once more. The only scary thing about it was how many of his mates challenged me to fights and tried to punch my inflated pecs. Oh, and how weird and giggly some of the mums got too. Have these people never seen a man in a red cape and skin-tight nylon chainmail leggings before, for heaven's sake? Lydia's mouth twitched as he struck a pose, one foot on a kitchen chair, flexing his muscles. Those poor women, they didn't stand a chance, she teased. Then her expression became serious. Talking of your in-laws, I saw Zoe the other day, she went on. It was surprisingly okay. Thanks for whatever you said to her. Good. She said that the two of you had spoken. And what did she think? Well, we didn't chat long, but she seemed to think it went okay too. Who would have thought? They smiled at each other. Right, I'm feeling a bit self-conscious in this get-up now, so I'm going to go and put some normal clothes on. Then shall we tool up and get started? Lydia plucked a pair of safety goggles from the box and put them on with a thumbs up. Let's do this thing. A short while later, as they began working through a list of helpful instructions that Lydia had printed out from a tree surgery website, Dan couldn't help thinking how much more easygoing and amicable it was doing this sort of task with her, rather than with Patrick, as originally planned. If he and his brother had ever managed to remove the dead sycamore, you could bet they would have been arguing over who got to use the chainsaw, jostling over who got to take the lead, an ongoing contest about who was the best at cutting the dead wood, who could lift the heaviest pieces, who got lumbered with all the clearing up. Of course, neither of them would have done anything as effeminate as consulting actual instructions either. That said, Dan found himself missing his brother very much again, wishing that Patrick was still around to be annoying in that brotherly way. But here they were anyway. Life went on. Once they'd made a plan and got started, the actual taking down of the tree was unexpectedly straightforward. They removed the branches first, then sawed the trunk down chunk by chunk, until all that remained was the stump. The website I looked at suggested drilling holes into that and using some Epsom salt mix to get rid of it, Lydia said, as they made a pile of dead wood alongside the shed for Dan to take to the dump at some point. Then she blushed. Sorry, I got quite into the whole research thing. Even watched a couple of YouTube videos on the subject. Usually, the only online tutorials I look at are for making stuff. Turns out that destroying stuff is really good fun too. I know what you mean, Dan said, heaving a last log onto the heap. Quite satisfying, isn't it? He straightened up and brushed the sawdust off his jeans. Thank you, by the way, for all of this. He turned to look at the garden, taking in how much emptier it seemed now. Bigger. Sometimes it wasn't until you removed a problem that you could see how much it had dominated everything else. It was so thoughtful of you. God knows when I would have got round to doing it otherwise. No worries, she said. He hesitated, not wanting their time together to be over just yet. He liked having her here. So, do you have to rush off? Only I've got some beers in the fridge if you fancy one. Or coffee? Actually, maybe we should have a coffee. Then I'll be able to drive you back with all this stuff later on. I'd love a beer, she said, apparently ignoring his last suggestion. And there's no rush with the gear. I borrowed it from a couple of my dad's mates. It's not like I've paid a hire charge or anything. She pulled a funny face. And Dad's just been dumped by a text, so he's happy to have Jem for the rest of the day, he said. Take his mind off the heartbreak. Wait, said Dan, unable to keep track of the man's convoluted love life. Is this the same date who went into labour a few weeks ago? No, this was the new one. Only lasted until the starters before she vanished, Lydia snorted. That's what you get when you go on Tinder and lie about your age, apparently. I'll bear that in mind, said Dan. In the meantime, 2 beers coming up. Lydia must have been rummaging around in the shed while he was in the kitchen, because when he returned bearing a bottle for them each, she had unearthed a couple of ancient patio chairs left behind by the previous owners of the flat. Having unfolded them, she was now brushing muck and cobwebs off their seats. Is this okay? She asked. It feels so long since we've had proper sunshine. We should make the most of it. Good idea, said Dan, handing her a beer. They clinked the bottles together and gulped down a mouthful each. So, how's Rosemary? Lydia asked. Is she out of hospital yet? I was so chuffed she liked my dress, you know. She had dimples when she smiled, a flush of pride on her face. Was he staring at her too much? He couldn't take his eyes off her. Yeah, she's fine and back home again, Dan said. In fact, she asked me to say that she'd be very happy to give you sewing tuition any time. She said you must have been good, if the college offered you a place. Lydia had the beer bottle to her lips, but lowered it immediately. What did you just say? I mean, don't feel obliged to. Obviously, it was only an idea, Dan went on hurriedly. And Rosemary is a bit of a handful. She might not let you leave her flat once you cross her threshold, but are you kidding? I would love to have sewing tuition from her. Oh my God! Lydia's eyes shone. Did she really say that? You're not forcing me on her, are you? No, definitely not. It was all her idea. She liked you, and your dress. Wow, she beamed. Really? Wow. This is proper dream come true stuff. Thank you. She gazed up at the sky. 15 years late, but it's happening, Mum. Yes. Tell me about your mum, he said, seeing her wistfulness. That must have been hard, losing her when you were so young. Ah, she was lovely, Lydia said at once. Beautiful, Australian, bohemian, kind. One of those people who make you feel special, who get you. She always really got me, you know? I still miss her. As she moved her hand, the sun flashed on her silver ring, the one that looked like a tiny Viking helmet. Only Dan realised at that moment that it wasn't meant to be any kind of tiny Viking helmet. It was a miniature of Sydney Opera House. Do you still have family in Australia? He asked, remembering the list that had been framed on her kitchen wall. Favourite places to take Liddy. It must have been written by her mum, he guessed, feeling a pang for her loss. Lydia shook her head. Not anymore. Mum was an only child and her parents never really got over losing her, by the sound of things. Came over for the funeral and had a massive row with my dad. Blamed him, basically, for stealing her away from them. Dad was upset and broke off contact. I'm pretty sure they're dead now, unfortunately. She swigged from her beer and tucked her hair behind her ear. Anyway, that's enough doom and gloom for one day. How are things with you? What's happening with the rest of your sabbatical? You've got, what, a month left now? He ignored the question because a brilliant idea had just occurred to him. Listen, I've got some money, he said recklessly, before he could even think about what he was saying. I'll pay for you to go to Sydney. Lydia stared at him, completely taken aback. What? No, don't be daft. Yeah, I mean it. There was a bit left to me in Patrick's will. It would be enough for you and Jem to get plane tickets over there. You should go. retrace your mum's footsteps, explore her home city. She seemed genuinely stunned. Dan, that's ridiculously kind, but I don't need the money, he said. It's Patrick's money anyway. Think of it as him doing one nice thing for you. Belatedly. She drank from the beer bottle, looking agonized, then shook her head. I can't, she said. Thank you, but it's too much. I'll probably kick myself for this later, because I do really want to go, but if I take your money, Patrick's money, whatever, I would still feel in debt to you. She broke off, an internal argument playing out on her face, but then shook her head once more. Thank you. It's so kind of you, insanely kind, and I really appreciate the offer. But I think it's something I need to do for myself. I need to find a way to make it my trip, if that makes sense. He was feeling a bit of an idiot now, as if he'd overplayed his hand, and he could totally see what she meant. Of course she wanted the trip to be on her own terms. Okay, he said. Was that weird of me? Sorry, it seemed a good idea as I was saying the words, but it was a good idea. It was a lovely idea. She put her beer down and took one of his hands between hers. You're a lovely man. All the breath seemed to leave him at that moment. Thank you, he said, his heart quickening. You're lovely too. Really, incredibly lovely. A shaft of sunlight was angling onto her face, lighting her cheekbones, and she was smiling at him. All he wanted to do was kiss her, hold her. Should he? Would it be crossing a forbidden boundary? He hadn't felt this way about a woman for so long. So long. Lydia, he said, almost in a groan, and then his body apparently decided for him because he was leaning towards her, their lips meeting. He could smell her coconut shampoo as they kissed, her mouth soft against his. Blood drummed urgently through him and he slid his hands around her back. Oh my God. They were the only two people in the world suddenly. His heart seemed to be overflowing, fireworks bursting and soaring in his head. How had he forgotten how good a first kiss could be? They broke apart after a moment and looked at each other breathlessly. Her pupils were huge. Is this okay? She asked, their heads still close together. What do you mean, because of... The passion died away in him a little, a flame turned down. Because of Patrick, he thought, but didn't say. And Zoe, and how difficult this might make everything, how weird it might become. Pessimism began to seep in. Oh, should we be doing this? Her reply was to lean forward and kiss him again, deeper and with more intensity. Yes, she managed to say as the kiss showed no signs of ending. Yes, we bloody well should. Lydia and Patrick hadn't lasted long, he reminded himself. It had been years ago, and he would do everything differently, his way. I completely agree, he said. Chapter 34. Catching a glimpse of her red, sweaty face in the mirrored wall opposite, as she took up the warrior pose, Zoe realised that, for the first time since the night Patrick vanished, she was actually feeling okay. Tentatively okay. Admittedly, her thighs were killing her. Her bum ached from the long series of bridges and planks that she and her classmates had been forced through, and she was totally regretting not having put on extra deodorant that morning. Despite all of that, when exhorted by the yoga teacher just now to listen to her body, Zoe felt as if hers was giving her a valiant thumbs up. So was her head. She had been so engrossed in the challenges of the hot yoga class that Claire had dragged her along to, in fact, that she hadn't thought about Patrick or the children or Lydia once so far. She hadn't had a chance to, what with the extreme concentration and sweating that was happening right now. This was progress, she decided. It was the middle of May, her favourite month of the year, and she'd got out of bed that morning feeling what she dimly recognised as optimism once more. Okay, so it wasn't exactly a pom-pom, shaking, wholehearted woo yeah about the world, more a determined gritting of the teeth, a squaring of the shoulders that made her feel as if she could cope. That she would cope. This, too, was progress. The last few weeks felt like a giant leap forward in terms of progress, come to that. An upward curve once more. By chance, after the raucous but successful party for Gabe's birthday, she'd bumped into Felicia Perez in the leisure centre car park. Felicia was a head teacher she'd worked for previously, who mentioned that her school had an upcoming maternity cover vacancy, and would Zoe be interested? Zoe was. She had been meaning to start putting out feelers for work, so to be presented with an opportunity like this was particularly fortuitous. Plus, it was an ideal way back into teaching. 3 days a week in a spirited Year 2 class, beginning after the May half-term. Perfect. Whether her application was successful or not, Zoe had now decided to set this as the deadline to get everything else sorted out. It felt possible. Life in general was starting to feel possible after the long, dark months she had survived. Taking on Patrick's business was going to be too much for her, she had realised. So she had arranged for the lettings agent to manage the properties, as well as organising the rentals. The tenants could stay put, giving her useful extra income, with the properties representing good investments for the children's futures. With one exception. There was currently one unoccupied flat on Whitecliff Road that she had decided to sell and give the proceeds straight to Lydia and Jemima, in lieu of any further maintenance money from Patrick. She had talked the idea through with her brother, the most practical, level-headed person she knew, and it seemed like a fair solution. "Are you sure? It's very generous, so, but you don't have to," he had advised her. "The will has already been granted probate, right? So Lydia would be on shaky ground if she tried to contest it." Zoe didn't want to wrangle with Lydia about money. She didn't want the other woman to feel hard done by, and for the two of them to end up arguing in court, or for the little girl to be cheated out of her father's pretty sizable earnings. When she and Lydia had sat down in that Italian cafe and talked, honestly and openly, it had felt a completely different experience from the excruciating exchange she'd had with Mary. Lydia had been kind to her. Lydia had always been kind, come to think of it. "I'm sure," Zoe told her brother. She blinked, realising that everyone else in the class had moved into triangle pose, arms stretched wide, bending over to reach their ankle with the lower hand, and Zoe hastily copied Claire's positioning. From her new angle, she could see a blackbird alighting on the branch of a tree outside, head cocked slightly, as if it was trying to peer in. "Eyes to the ceiling," the teacher called. "Keep your jaw soft. Don't forget to breathe." Zoe gazed up at the ceiling and breathed. A month ago, she would have looked at that blackbird and wondered if it might be a sign from Patrick, she thought to herself. She had been so desperate previously, obsessed even, about receiving any kind of sign from him, a message from beyond the grave that said he loved her and was sorry. But now here she was, dripping with sweat in a hot yoga studio, her body working hard for her, breathing strong, and maybe she didn't need any sign after all. Maybe this was the sign. She and the children were gradually coming through the long tunnel of bereavement together, united and bearing up. After singing in the car at the top of her voice had proved so cathartic, she joined a choir that one of the mums from school had started, with some initial trepidation, admittedly, but she was already finding singing to be uplifting, especially as part of a group. The other members were friendly and fun, and Zoe was pretty sure some of them didn't even know about Patrick, which made things easier. Most importantly, following the interminable weeks of inertia, she had finally bitten the bullet and contacted a therapist. With her help, Zoe was beginning to make peace with what had happened, with the man her husband had really been, and to let go of all the bad stuff, session by session. "Some men are not cut out for marriage," her mum had said sadly, when Zoe poured her heart out over the phone. "Your dad was the same. He was a great bloke, really fun to be around. But he couldn't handle the commitment of marriage and family life. He just wasn't good at that side of things. Some people aren't. But Patrick did love you, darling. It was there for everyone to see. He loved you and the children so much. Unfortunately, he seemed to have his demons as well, though." Zoe didn't want to feel angry with Patrick for the rest of her life. Forgiveness still seemed a way off, but she had made a pact with herself to hang on to her loving memories and try to let go of the betrayals, to ignore those demons of his for now. He had loved her. The rest she would come to terms with in her own time. Everything would work out, she kept telling herself, one day at a time. It was all she could do, but it was enough. "Last day of freedom," said Lydia, licking her ice cream. "How does it feel?" Dan gazed out at the horizon and put his arm round her. The weeks had passed and tomorrow morning he was due back at his desk. Suit on, travel card renewed, office politics resumed. "I don't want this to end," he confessed. "Can we just stay here instead?" He, Lydia and Jemima had driven down to Hayling Island for a day at the seaside, at Lydia's suggestion. "So you can tell your colleagues you've at least been somewhere," she had said. "South America, South Hampshire, they're practically interchangeable, really." Dan might not have travelled very far distance-wise, but all the same, the last 3 months had definitely been a journey. Through the hell of grief and guilt initially, with unexpected stops along the way. If his planned trip to the Southern Hemisphere had been about expanding his horizons, stepping out of his comfort zone and trying new things, then you could say that he'd achieved all of those and more without leaving the country. He had gone skateboarding and dancing. He'd been a landlord and a superhero, a chauffeur, a unicorn, a confidant and confessor. Stepping into Patrick's shoes had been life-changing, but above all, it had shown him how to be himself. For once, he didn't need a spreadsheet to chart this progress. "I can't stay here," Lydia reminded him now, leaning against his shoulder. "I've got my hot date with Rosemary and her sewing machine in the morning. I'm not missing that for anything. Even a night camping out on this beach with you, I'm afraid. Priorities." He kissed the top of her head. "Fair enough," he said. Lydia and Rosemary had become fast friends by the sound of things, working together over the whir of the sewing machine, experimenting with different fabrics and styles, and studying the work of famous designers. Rosemary was delighted to have the company, and was apparently a patient, enthusiastic teacher, encouraging and supportive, yet honest in her critique. She was already talking about contacts of hers who might be able to offer Lydia paid internships once her skills were at a certain level. "I feel as if all my synapses are lighting up whenever I'm with her," Lydia had said when she and Dan went out for dinner a few evenings ago. "That I'm learning so much just from a couple of hours each time. My brain hasn't had this much excitement for years." "Oh, really?" he'd said, pretending to take this personally, and she'd laughed and poked him with a breadstick. "You know what I mean," she said. "Being with you is a different kind of excitement. There are more ways than one to get your kicks." There was truth in this. Truth it had taken him a while to appreciate. "Get some hobbies, Daniel," Rosemary had told him when she embarked on her own spree of social bravery, and he had realised the wisdom in her advice. His previously stagnant life had become immeasurably richer through filling it with new people and activities over the last few months, and he wanted to keep it that way once he returned to the office. You could hold down any kind of job if the rest of your life was full and interesting, he hoped. To that end, Dan had taken up Steve's offer to join the rowing club with him, and was regularly running alongside Mark, who was competing in a half marathon in September. With Lydia's input, he had also begun to transform his flat from a boring box into somewhere that actually resembled a home. So far, he had painted the living room the pale blue of a dawn sky, and had hung up a series of framed prints and photos, including some that Ethan had taken during their sculpture walk. His nephew had been delighted, especially when Dan chucked him 20 quid to get them blown up and printed in the school darkroom. Meanwhile, Lydia had run up some curtains for him on her sewing machine, and his mum had arrived with a box of houseplants that she promised it was almost impossible to kill. "Plants always lift the spirits," she said, arranging them along the windowsill. She'd also bought him a rowan sapling for the back garden, which they planted together. Every time he looked at its young, frond-like leaves, he felt a quickening of hope. Life went on. That wasn't all. Having forged new bonds with Ethan, Gabe and Bea, Dan was not about to vanish from their lives in a hurry. Zoe was due to return to teaching after half-term, and Dan planned to use his company's flexible working scheme to finish early on Tuesdays, so that he could pick up the younger children from school then. He'd suggested taking Bea to the city farm for pony riding classes, the nearest he could get to finding real unicorns, as well as being responsible for Gabe's Saturday morning skateboarding sessions. On Wednesdays, he'd be working from home so that he could continue driving Ethan to the sculpture club, thus keeping up to date with his nephew's life, as well as his own musical education. There was a Sunday workshop coming up soon at the club, parents and carers welcome, and Dan had been temporarily lost for words when Ethan mumbled an offhand invitation for him to come along. "Mum doesn't have a clue about art, but I thought you might fancy it. You're always badgering me about what we do in there," he'd said, with that funny mixture of teenage bravado and vulnerability. Dan had agreed like a shot. Being invited was like receiving some kind of medal, one that he would wear with pride. "He sounds great," Lydia had said, on hearing about Ethan. "My kind of kid. Oh, I hope I can meet him soon. And Jemima will love Gabe. She's just started playing football at school and talks about nothing else. Plus, she's desperate for a sister to play with." Zoe was still building up to telling the children about their new half-sister. Bea had recently entered a particularly clingy phase, she said, and it wasn't the right time. But Dan had broken the news about Lydia and Jemima to his parents, who, once over the shock, were keen to get to know their new granddaughter and her mum. "I'm so sad for Zoe that Patrick could have done such a thing. But goodness, I'm so happy for me that there's another grandchild to love," Liz confessed to Dan. "Is that selfish?" "I think it's called being human," Dan had reassured her. "And Jemima's never had a grandma. It'll be lovely for her too, remember?" The biggest difference to Dan's new post-sabbatical life was that he intended to spend lots of time with Lydia. As much time as possible. She, out of everyone, had painted his world with vivid new colours. She made his life brighter and more fun. Until now, he hadn't thought much about the future, plodding through each day as it came. But now he wanted to look ahead, make plans, start dreaming again. The two of them were still taking it slowly, feeling their way gradually into a relationship, but only because it felt too important to rush. The Patrick thing would always be there between them, but Dan was trying not to dwell on it. At least it would provide an interesting answer to the old, "How did you two meet?" question, he supposed. It's not important, Lydia had assured him. And don't worry, if anyone asks, I'm totally going to say that you're better than him. In every way. Okay? He opened his mouth to protest that it hadn't even crossed his mind, but Lydia already knew how competitive the two of them had been. Of course it had crossed his mind. Good to hear, he replied instead, feeling only a tiny bit sheepish. He really liked her. That was the main thing. Lydia was funny and surprising, loyal and kind. He thought about her all the time. He wanted to make her happy. He had met her dad and Bridget, both of whom seemed delighted for them. Even Zoe had given the relationship her blessing, however bittersweet Dan knew it must be for her. She had also been incredibly generous to Lydia. The sale of the Whitecliff Road flat would not only mean financial stability for Lydia and Jemima, but also gave Lydia the chance to book the trip to Sydney that she'd always dreamed of, that coming winter, hopefully. Play your cards right, she'd said to Dan with a raised eyebrow, and there might even be space for you on the plane as well. He could think of nothing he'd like more. Out of the blue, he'd had a Facebook message from Rebecca recently. Saw you holding hands with a woman across Ravenscourt Park the other day, she had written. You look happy, Dan. I'm glad for you. No hard feelings. No hard feelings, he had replied. And to his astonishment, he realised that at last he could think about her without bitterness, without rancour. For the first time since their divorce, he felt as if an aching wound had healed, as if he had finally moved on from the pain. He was coming to terms with the loss of his brother too. He would probably never know why Patrick had said those things to him on their last evening together, but he wouldn't let that define their relationship or how he would go on thinking about Patrick. Nobody's perfect, his mum had said. We're all muddling along, trying to do our best, getting it wrong sometimes. But that's life. Patrick had got it wrong at times. Dan had got it wrong too. But it didn't make them bad people. Just people. A week ago, his parents, Zoe and the kids, had come round for dinner, and while Ethan showed his granddad an animation he'd made on his phone, and Liz supervised Gabe juggling and Bea attempting handstands in the garden, Zoe surprised Dan by giving him a large brown envelope. She'd finally got round to clearing out some of Patrick's old clothes and things that she didn't want to keep or pass on to the children. And I found this, she said. In a box with all sorts of precious things. First Valentine cards we'd sent each other, and your great-granddad's war medals, and some Father's Day pictures the children had drawn, that sort of thing. I thought you might want it. Dan had opened the envelope to find a photo from his graduation day up in York, outside Central Hall. Patrick had protested the whole time about being there, teasing Dan about his gown and mortarboard, scoffing at the university traditions, constantly overplaying his own lack of further education. What do I know? I'm just a builder, common as muck, me. Until Dan had been completely sick of him and wished Patrick hadn't bothered coming. He felt unexpectedly touched now to discover that his brother had not only taken photos, but had kept one, in a box of precious things, no less. This must have shown on his face because Zoe had put a hand on his shoulder. He was dead proud of you, you know, Dan. I bet Patrick never told you that, did he? But he was always praising you in front of the kids, saying how clever he thought you were. No, he hadn't said that to Dan's face, not once. He hadn't been that kind of brother. But all the same, it gave Dan the warmest of feelings to hear Zoe's words. He hadn't realised how much he had needed that warmth until then. And it was good. Really good. He gave Lydia another squeeze now, and they both laughed as Jemima, racing back up the beach towards them, trod in a huge mound of stinking, slippery seaweed and shrieked in dismay. Yuck! She wailed, peeling slimy strands off her bare arms with a look of revulsion. Gross! God, I feel happy, Dan said suddenly as they sat there, the sun bright and warm on their skin, the sea pounding cheerfully into shore. Whatever had happened in the past seemed irrelevant here in this moment, a cloud that had burned away in the heat of the day. The future stretched ahead of them as far out as the horizon, twinkling like sunlight on the water. "Me too," Lydia said, and squeezed him right back. Epilogue. Then. It was almost midnight, and the Thames was rolling along, black as tar, wrinkling and smoothing itself beneath the starlit sky. The houseboats were shadowy shapes at their moorings, as frost scattered icy glitter across rooftops and railings, silvering each trembling blade of grass. High above, a crescent moon gleamed, as lustrous as wedding satin. Patrick walked unsteadily down the river path, hands shoved in his pockets, head bowed. His world seemed to have tilted on its axis, and he wasn't sure how to right himself again. First, there had been the breathless phone call from Mary that afternoon. "I've got something to tell you," leaving him with the prickling sense that luck was slipping between his fingers, that maybe the charm he'd always relied upon might not be enough to rescue him this time. Then, feeling cornered, he had lashed out needlessly, hurting people he loved with his words. Zoe, initially, as they had that stupid row about university, which even as he was arguing he knew was bollocks. Of course he wanted his kids to do well. He'd be the proudest man alive if they achieved so much. But he had argued for argument's sake, from some desire to punish her because he knew he should be punishing himself. He was a bad person, the worst. And then Dan had wound him up, being so enthusiastic about going travelling, leaving Patrick feeling jealous. Yeah, jealous of his brother's adventures. Because he was stuck here with Zoe and the kids, and another one on the way. And this time he couldn't just cut her loose, as he had done in a panic with Lydia. This time it was Mary, who lived 3 streets away, with children at the same school as his kids, which made everything more complicated. What was he going to do? Had he blown everything? "It's definitely yours," Mary had sobbed. "John had a vasectomy last year. He'll kill me if he finds out what we've done." Patrick felt terrible about it. She'd been so miserable in that marriage. He had felt like some kind of hero, swooping in and rescuing her, making her smile again. He didn't feel much of a hero now, though. They'd ended up having an argument the second time she phoned, when he was in the pub waiting for Dan. Christ, what a mess. A scouring wind skimmed off the river against his face, and somewhere in the distance a fox shrieked, as high-pitched and unnerving as a child's scream. Patrick hunched deeper into the collar of his coat, wishing he was already at home, the front door bolted, the heating pipes cooling with their soft clicks and creaks, lying warm and safe in bed with the woman he loved. But did he even deserve to be there anymore, after what he had done? He had fallen for Mary too, that was the thing. There was something so fragile and pretty about her that made him want to look after her. But how could he? How had he let things go so far again? What was wrong with him that he kept doing this to himself? Suddenly there were footsteps scuffling behind him. A shout. "Oi, mate!" He turned to see a homeless guy with no front teeth, probably about the same age as him. "Don't suppose you could spare a few quid, could you?" the man asked. He was wearing jogging bottoms and a filthy t-shirt, whose trainers split on the toes. He smelled terrible, of sweat and booze and hard times. Patrick swallowed, aware that this man could easily have been him if things had been different. If he hadn't met the right woman, lucked in on a couple of cheap properties and made some easy money. And who knew? If Zoe found out about Mary and kicked him out, this could be a vision of his future self. Alone, unmoored, and desperate. Patrick dug out his wallet and pulled all the notes from it. 50 quid or so. "Have the lot," he said, putting it into the other man's grimy palm and walking on. The act of generosity made him feel momentarily better, as if perhaps he wasn't all bad. He started to walk quicker, thinking about how he was going to turn everything round. He'd have to apologise to Dan in the morning, tell him he'd made up those comments about Rebecca out of spite. "Sorry," he'd say. "I was being a prick. I was jealous, that's all." Imagine being so honest and generous. He would do it, though. More importantly, he would make it up to Zoe too. Say sorry for their pointless argument. Treat her better from now on. After that, he would let Mary down as gently as possible, take her to a clinic far out of town, if that was what she wanted, and hold her hand, then tell her they had to stop seeing each other. He couldn't risk losing Zoe, he'd say, regretful but determined. And then he would redouble his efforts at home. He had been weak before, but would keep to the straight and narrow from this day onwards. No more playing away, he promised himself. Because he loved Zoe so much. He never wanted to hurt her. Never. Just as he was thinking this, he saw some wild daffodils in the moonlight, growing in a clump at the bottom of the riverbank. Zoe's favourite flower. He would pick them for her because he loved her. Because from now on, he was going to be the best and most appreciative husband. From now on, it was only her for him. He meant it this time. He slithered unsteadily down the steep bank towards the daffodils. The ground was very wet after all the rain they'd had recently, the mud dangerously soft. But he really wanted to do this, to pick the flowers for his wife. But then, with a sudden loss of balance, his feet skidded straight out from under him, and he lurched, arms windmilling, powerless to stop himself falling. He toppled over and the momentum carried him into the water, his head bashing hard against a rock in the shallows as he fell. His mind went out like a light, his body motionless in the swollen black river, face down. The breeze shook the bowed heads of the daffodils, and a few bubbles rose to the surface of the water, glistening silver under the light of the moon. Pop, pop, pop. The current dragged Patrick's body further into the river, water soaking through his clothes and into his shoes, his pockets, his lungs. Then the river swallowed him right up, and he was gone. Now, 7 months to the day since Patrick took his last stunned breaths, a woman was walking along a leafy West London street, trailing perfume, late to meet her husband for their anniversary dinner. Her heels clicked as she hurried along, replaying in her head the chatty phone call from their eldest daughter that had delayed her, smiling as she imagined relaying all the news to her husband across the restaurant table once she arrived. So deep in thought was she that she didn't realise the fastening of the silver brooch pinned to her coat lapel was gradually working itself looser with each step, the pin eventually easing from the velvety fabric and falling to the pavement with a tiny clink. The woman didn't notice, continuing her journey, and the brooch remained there in the autumnal dusk, stepped over unseen by passers-by, sniffed at by a spaniel on its evening walk as the indigo shadows gathered and thickened into night-time. The next morning, a different woman walked down her front path. She was dressed smartly in a teal shift dress that had been made especially for her by her brother-in-law's girlfriend, with her favourite indigo scarf knotted around her neck. Her head was full of lesson plans for that day's teaching, until she spotted the brooch glinting there in the mild September sunshine. She crouched down and picked it up, exclaiming as she saw that it was a small silver brooch in the shape of a daffodil, her favourite flower. "What's that, Mummy?" asked a little girl with pink butterfly slides in her hair. Butterflies were her new thing. Unicorns were so last week. "Someone must have dropped it," the woman said, glancing up and down the street. Her heart was racing. Could it be? She thought, goosebumps prickling her skin. At last? "What is it?" asked her younger son, who was fiddling with his bike helmet. He had recently been allowed to skateboard to school, under strict instructions not to show off or attempt any tricks until he was well inside the school gates. Nobody had any huge confidence that these instructions would be closely followed for very long, but so far at least, so good. "Why is everyone standing around?" her eldest son asked grumpily, wheeling his bike up behind them. "I'm going to be late. Remember, I'm going round to Jay's after school." He called over one shoulder as he hooked a leg over his bike and pedalled away. Jay was a new friend, possibly a boyfriend, the woman had been thinking to herself. But whether he was or not, he seemed to make her son happy. That was all that mattered. "Bye, love. Have a good day," the woman shouted after him. Her eyes shone as she gazed down at the brooch in her hand again. "It's a sign," she said happily. "I know it is." Then, for some reason unknown to her children, she smiled up at the sky and blew a kiss into the air. "Thank you," she called, still gazing upwards. "Thank you." A moment later, seeing their confused expressions, she ruffled her daughter's hair and knocked gently on her son's protective helmet. "Come on then, off to school we go." The boy wrinkled his nose at her as they set off. "You're being weird, Mum," he informed her, gliding away on his skateboard. The girl slid a hand into hers. "Are you actually okay, Mummy?" she asked, gazing up wonderingly. Zoe smiled again and squeezed Bee's hand. Remembering the perfect blue sky Pembrokeshire day last month when they'd scattered Patrick's ashes and she'd found the right words for her eulogy. Thinking back to the Sunday a few weeks earlier when Dan, Lydia and Jemima had come to lunch for the first time, and after the initial few minutes of awkwardness, everyone had got along pretty well. Looking forward to whatever the future held next. "Yes," she said, as they started walking. "I actually am."
Macmillan Digital Audio and Belinda hope you enjoyed the reading of
The Promise by Lucy Diamond, read by Catherine Stewart.
Our audiobooks are becoming increasingly popular among travellers, families, and people who are on the go. If you really enjoyed this audiobook, please introduce your friends and family to the experience. We're sure they'll love you for it. If you want to hear more about our fabulous range of titles, please visit us online at belinda.com. Thanks for listening, and remember to always take a Belinda audiobook with you.